Welcome, and thanks for joining me again for part 2 of my Prepping Unplugged Challenge review. In part 1, I showed how my preps helped me to endure being off-grid for 48 hours. In this video, I'll share some of the things that I learned and the things that I need to work on to better prepare for a real-life grid-down situation. For me, going off-grid for 48 hours was just an inconvenience, because really, I think anybody could survive 48 hours off-grid, even if you're not prepared at all without any food or water for that matter. You just hunker down and wait it out. But one of the benefits of going through this exercise is that you start thinking about all the what-ifs, like what if this was a long-term situation or even a permanent one. You begin looking at your preps a little bit differently. Taking this challenge really helps identify those long-term weaknesses. And anyone that's serious about prepping, I would highly recommend to take this challenge. Here, I have a couple trays of indoor plant starts. Without electricity, I wouldn't be able to use the heat mats or the grow lights. And most days this time of year it's just too cold to put them outside. So I realized I would need a way to heat the greenhouse, which means a lot more physical labor to stockpile more firewood and to keep the wood stove stoked up. And then there's the issue of refrigeration. Short term, I can use the generator, but generators wear out and fuel sources become depleted. I could do like they did before refrigeration was invented and collect ice during the winter, store it under a heavy blanket of an insulating hay, or I could fabricate a solar ice maker. But either way, I've got to get something going. As I was feeding my chickens, I considered their feed. Where would I get more if the feed stores are no longer in operation, or if I can't travel to get to a feed store? I think in that case I would have to let them free range and just take the risk of losing some to predators. This means I need to keep a rotation of incubated eggs going so new hatches can replace the birds that are taken. But how do I keep an incubator at the required temperature consistently? I could do it with a solar-powered system, but if the grid-down situation is caused by an EMP or a CME, would I have working charge controllers or power converters? So I need to acquire a Faraday cage and probably some redundant electronics. The solar panels themselves would be unaffected by an EMP, so it would still be possible to control the battery charge manually by connecting and disconnecting the leads as needed. So another good option would be to have lights and heaters that operate straight off the battery's DC power. In my first Prepper Unplugged video, I touched a little on how I would wash clothing, which would be another physically demanding and time-consuming process. But previously I've never considered how I would do something so simple as to vacuum the floor. Sweeping the carpet only takes care of the surface debris, and only then if it's a low-pile carpet. Hard surface floors are no problem to clean. So I'm thinking more laminate flooring and throw rugs are in my future. At least the throw rugs can be hung out on occasion and beat with a board to knock the dust out of them. Now, I am blessed to have a great producing water well, but the static level is about 120 feet below the surface. There is a nearby creek that I can fetch water from, but it would be so much more convenient to have a way of getting it from my own well. I considered I could pull the existing pump and piping out and drop down a specially made bucket using a rope and pulley system. But at this time, I don't have that bucket made. So that is something I need to get done while I still have the resources and equipment available to fabricate it. Another option would be to install a hand pump capable of working at that depth, but they don't last forever either, and they're a little bit out of my budget. There are so many things to consider depending on the severity of the situation. I'm trying to think of some of the less obvious ones, some of the things that you might not have thought of before, and I certainly didn't think of before. Another thing that crossed my mind, if it were an EMP situation, we'd suddenly have a lot of consumer electronics that would be worthless. What would we do with all those televisions, telephones, radios, computers, printers, digital clocks, vehicles? It's all useless. Might as well throw them out, but to where? I'm fortunate here that I've got a few acres that I can probably find a corner, stack them up, or dig a hole and bury them. I doubt that any landfills would be operating, and even if they were, how would you get there? If there is an EMP event, it could most likely be caused by a nuclear explosion in the upper atmosphere. So radioactive fallout is another concern. I do have the potassium iodine tablets, but nothing else to protect me from the fallout itself. So another thing I realize I need to do is to stock up on plastic sheeting and tape, and possibly even a chemical suit and mask. There's a lot of people who talk about a SHTF situation sending us back to an 1800s or Mad Max type of a lifestyle. Except for isolated areas like right under a nuclear blast or something, I don't see that as being a long-term situation. And the reason for that is because the technology already exists. It's not like the wheel has to be reinvented. So it's just a matter of rebuilding that wheel. But a few months, a few years, it's going to feel like eternity if you're not prepared to deal with it. I hope I've given you some ideas, some food for thought to help you in your own preparations. As you can see from the list that's in front of my face here, I've got a few of them I need to work on myself. And there's a lot more where this come from. But I'd like to see your video on the Prepping Unplugged Challenge and learn from your experience. Well, thanks for joining me. This is Modoc 42. God bless.